So the recording is in progress, as we told you ahead of time. What I'm going to do is go through this presentation, and we'll take questions at the end. You can hold on to them and ask them yourself, or you can put them in the chat if you prefer. And Tracy Frederick is monitoring this, and she'll manage those questions, anything that comes up in the chat. The last thing I want to mention, and I hope I remember to do this at the end, is starting on April 24, we're going to launch a 4-week lecture series, lessons on being more in-depth dives into the things we're going to talk about today. April 24, the first session will be all on communications, and my co-author on the book, Melanie Sturm, will be running that course. She's a brilliant communicator, and it's really her training has really added a lot to my understanding of how to talk about issues. So we published the book called 8 Things to Know About Running for School Board, based on a lot of feedback that we got from school board members, not just in Kansas, but really across the nation. We work with a number of other states that have similar efforts, and the book is actually being used as a recruiting tool now in, I think it's 7 states have it in place right now. So with that little bit of background, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here, assuming I can do that properly. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the first, and I'm going to go through this in one lesson at a time. Some I'll spend a little bit more time on than others. But the first lesson is that the realities of student achievement they're really much lower than what a lot of parents and other folks have been led to believe. In the case of, and almost everything I'm going to talk to you about here tonight is not unique to Kansas. There are Kansas examples, but we found these things all across the nation. In the case of Kansas, we're now below the national average, and we have been below the national average for several years, maybe 4 or 5 years now. And that's, of course, in a nation that doesn't have really good average achievement. So that's, even when we were above the national average, it still was not what most people would call mission accomplished. We are not in the top 10, as our State School Board Association likes to say. They've come out with reports like every other year when the NAEP results come out, and with their own proprietary analysis, they declare that Kansas is among the top 10 in the nation. Unfortunately, that's never been true. It's not even been close to true. And so this is one of the things I want you to take a look at and just ask yourself, what's wrong with this picture? The blue line across the top is the high school graduation rate in Kansas, and you can see it's gone up a little bit. Now it's pushing 90%. But at the same time, college readiness on the ACT has plummeted from 32% to 18%. And what this really says is the high school graduation rates all across the nation are absolutely meaningless. They might be more akin to attendance certificates than any kind of measure of actual achievement. Now, this is the trend since 2015 of state assessment results for the state of Kansas. And this measures achievement in grades 3 through 8 and 10 as an average. And you can see that outcomes were falling pretty significantly even before COVID. It's gotten worse since then, but this is not the decline we're seeing here and in many other states is not a COVID phenomenon. It's just part of a trend. So for example, we had 23% of Kansas students below grade level in math in 2015. That was the first year of the current state assessment, which is why we start there. And now it's up to 33%. We actually have 1/3 of all students in Kansas below grade level in reading. To put that in perspective, that's about 150,000 students in Kansas who are reading below grade level. That's a tragedy. Now, here are some of the district scores, and I'm only showing here the 10th grade results. And that's because the 10th grade numbers are typically the worst. That's because achievement declines as kids move from fourth grade to fifth grade and so forth. And it really explains when you see the 10th grade numbers, now it kind of makes sense that you're seeing only 18% of students college ready in English, reading, math, and science on the ACT. So statewide, almost half the kids in 10th grade are below grade level in math, and a third are below grade level in English language arts. There's hardly any here, again, where I think a parent would say this is mission accomplished for our district. Topeka, only 12% proficient in math. You look at Leavenworth, 45% below grade level, only 19% proficient. The ELA numbers tend to be a little bit better than math, but by no means good. I mean, you can see we have a number of districts here and larger districts in the state where we're pushing half or more of our high school students being below grade level. Now, we mentioned the ACT initially. This is a comparison of ACT with spending and achievement. The orange line represents per student spending if it had been increased for inflation since 2002. The green line is the actual. So you can see that there's been a pretty significant increase in spending and far greater than inflation, but achievement has gone down. It was moving up until 2015, and there's been a precipitous fall off since then. Why that is the subject of some speculation, but I think there's some good things we can talk about later if you want to get into that in the Q&A. Lesson 2 is about the district's purpose being to improve student outcomes. Now, it should be the purpose, and I imagine a lot of people in every district would say, of course, that's our purpose. But it's not the case when you look at the actual actions. What we tend to get is an amalgam of many different things. And this is a quote here from A.J. Crable, who wrote great on their behalf. A.J. is a nationally known school board trainer. And basically he's saying we don't exist to have great buildings, happy parents, balanced budgets, and so forth. These are all really important things, but none of them are the ends. They're inputs, and frankly, they're mostly adult inputs. What we really need to be focusing on are student outcomes. So it should also, we believe, be a candidate's purpose for running for school board. There's a wide range of reasons why they might be prompted. But if you're running on anything else other than improving student outcomes, you're going to be subject to a lot more criticism, whether it's on library books or a better football team or whatever the reason is. If you're focused on improving student outcomes, you should be able to get agreement with voters that we need to have some improvement. Who can really honestly argue with that? So throughout the book, we've had messaging techniques. In this case, in lesson 2, we even have some door knocking scripts to explain how you can use student achievement to introduce yourself and engage voters. It's also a great way to discuss some of the more controversial issues that you'll run across. Diversity, equity, inclusion, for example. The premise when it was introduced was, well, if we do these things, then kids are going to feel better and they'll learn more as a result. Well, now we have the luxury of being able to look back and see if that's true. So a school board member, instead of saying at a board meeting or somewhere else, I'm opposed to this, because then the argument becomes about that. Instead, if you say, I understand the premise was to help students learn more. They would feel better and they learn more. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So help me understand why we should continue devoting time and resources to something that just isn't working the way we hoped it would. You're making someone defend their position instead of arguing about your position. The another part of this is not using labels that don't matter, like Republican and conservative and liberal. In our opinion, the only two labels that matter are you student focused or are you system focused? And by student focused, we mean one principle is budgets are built from the classroom first. You're going to spend money on other things, of course, but you don't want to start allocating money, especially discretionary money, to anything else until you've satisfied what you're hearing from teachers and principals. What do we need to do differently to improve outcomes? Let's deal with those first, and then we'll see what's left over. The second part of this definition is that curriculum and teaching methods have no politics, no social agendas included. We're going to focus solely on improving proficiency levels with proven instructional techniques. Anyone who can enthusiastically embrace those two principles is student focused. Anyone who hesitates or says, well, yeah, but there's other things, by default, they might not mean to, but they're really system focused. Lesson 3, we talk about, and this is a statement that we picked up from A.J. Crable, student outcomes won't change until adult behaviors change. So throughout lesson 3, we give some examples in Kansas of adults resisting change. I mean, we want to believe, parents want to believe that the education system will, if there's a problem, they will immediately step in to address it. And we believe that everyone really wants students to do better. Unfortunately, what we found is that they're not willing to change their behaviors in order to make student outcomes improve. So one example is that school boards, a lot of school districts have adopted policies that prohibit a board member from actually visiting a school when it's open. In some cases, it's an outright prohibition, or it's most often you have to get the superintendent's permission, and then you'll be chaperoned to see what they want you to see, rather than just being able to go and observe. We just had a piece of legislation that we got through the Senate that would require school board members to be allowed to visit, and the objections were pretty interesting. It was the House hasn't acted on that, but that was one of the things we wanted to try to get done. Board members who don't support the majority can be sanctioned publicly. So there's policies, for example, that will say once the board has voted on something, each board member will support it publicly. They don't want dissent. They don't want you to say, okay, so I mean, there's actually you weren't elected to represent the district. You were elected to represent the public, and you have an obligation to share your thoughts with your voters on what's going on in the district. You want to do it professionally, of course, but we've seen this happen to board members who expressed a different opinion, and the board sanctioned them in public. And the whole purpose, that's all they can do. They can take you off committees. They can't take you out of office, but they want to make an example so that you just toe the line. We even have districts, and probably most districts in Kansas, if not all, are breaking laws that are designed to improve student outcomes. One is the at-risk funding law. State law says school districts they must use and this is over $500 million. They must use it for above and beyond services for kids who are academically at risk. And we've had 2 state audits, one in 2019, one in 2023, that said they aren't spending money as required in state law. The 23 was a follow-up audit, and they said, no, they're still not doing it. The Department of Education and the state school board knows it. They won't do anything about it. And so that's the extent to which a lot of the adults in the system will go to avoid changing their behavior. One of the simplest ways for school board members to start digging in and figuring out what we need to do differently to improve outcomes is using the building needs assessment process. That's also in state law. The law says each year local school boards shall conduct these meetings. The intent is that board members will sit down with teachers and principals and anyone else who's interested, and they're supposed to get the answers to two questions. What are the proficiency barriers in this school? And then what do we need to do differently with our budget to overcome those barriers? Most superintendents will not allow board members to do that. They do not want board members to hear directly from teachers and principals. And we say that confidently based on 4 years of open records research we've done, where we've asked school districts to produce documentation that board members have been allowed. Several of them come right out and say, no, they're not supposed to do that. We don't do that. We don't believe in that. And here's an example of just why this is so important. After one of our training sessions a year ago, a board member, it's the first time the board member had heard about it, and he said, this is brilliant. We need to be doing this. Will somebody come with us and help get it started? So our executive director, Ward Cassidy, goes along and they go into an elementary school and they have all the teachers present. The principal's there, the superintendent came along, and at least one board member. They even had a few other employees say, can I come in too? I'm interested in this. It was a really unique situation. So they start asking the question, what's holding kids back in this building? And before long, one teacher kind of tentatively put her hand up and she said, I don't feel like I know how to teach kids how to read. Now you can imagine the gasps that went around from some people. And then pretty soon, all but one other teacher said, yeah, me too. And the reason is they were not trained in college how to teach kids how to read. We find in many school districts, there is no curriculum given to teachers that says, this is how you do things. These are the things we're going to cover. They're left to their own. And unfortunately, there are universities in Kansas and all over the country that do not teach the science of reading. Phonics is one of the components of the science of reading and structured literacy. It's the only thing that is proven to work. And fortunately, we finally got a bill passed last year, the Kansas Blueprint for Literacy, that is mandating the use of the science in reading in districts and universities and requiring training for teachers. But that's a classic example of how these building needs assessment are supposed to work. This is the essence of a strategic plan. What are the problems? What do we need to do to overcome them? Lesson 4 is about some of the basics of school finance. And again, this is just to emphasize that there is no connection between how much you spend and how much students achieve. This goes back to 1998, the first year that Kansas participated in the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's a test administered by the U.S. Department of Education. And here you can see that reading proficiency in 4th and 8th grade just kind of bumped along in the low to mid 30s. And then in 2017, now this test is given every 2 years, except COVID got it off schedule. Now we're down to 28% proficient in the 4th grade and only 25% proficient in the 8th grade, while spending continues to grow much faster than inflation. What's not on here is that the plurality, the biggest section of students in 4th grade are below basic. 40% of Kansas students are below basic. So there really is no relationship between money and achievement, other than money can make a difference. It's how you spend the money that can do that, not how much you spend. So when we're going through part of that process with the building needs assessment, how do we realign the budget to reallocate resources? We teach board members how to do some benchmarking to find places to start looking. So this is one example. What you're looking at here is a comparison of employment and enrollment. So over the last 20 years, we've seen a 7% increase in full-time equivalent students in Kansas and a 13% increase in classroom teachers. So that should mean that obviously the student to teacher ratio has dropped. And so there shouldn't be any significant changes in classroom size. If there is, that's a management issue, not a lack of funding or a lack of classroom teachers. Other teachers are mostly special education, and then managers. Now, managers is a term we use that includes superintendents, assistant and deputy superintendents, principals, assistant principals, anyone with director in their title, and curriculum specialists. And this is all these numbers are come from school districts. We just the Department of Education collects it from districts, and we get it from them either by scraping it from the website or with open records requests. So here we're seeing a 61% increase in managers and a 70% increase in all other employees. So if this represents your district and you're looking to repurpose money, you're going to have to look at employment, because about 80 to 85% of the district's costs are wrapped up in personnel. So you have to start looking at where can we repurpose, and it's asking questions. Why do we have such an increase in managers? Where can we make a change there to free up money to get it into the classroom? It doesn't mean that any of these numbers are wrong. It doesn't mean that there should be an exact, if you have a 7% increase in enrollment, you should only have a 7% increase in these employment levels. It doesn't mean that. But if there are big differences, those are good places to start looking, because that's where you're probably going to find some great opportunities to repurpose budgets. Another way of doing benchmarking is comparing spending per student. Now, here we only go to 24 because we're still in the 25 school year. And this is how spending is broken out. These are the primary functions that the Department of Education has in the budgeting process. So while inflation was up 55% over the last 19 years, you can see that all the spending except for capital outlay is considerably higher than that. And again, it's not that it's wrong or should be at 55. It's that it's an opportunity to start asking questions. Why is our operations and maintenance up 112%? Why is transportation up twice the amount of inflation, especially if you've had a decline in enrollment? Now, it could be that the base year or the most current year were abnormal. It could have been an abnormal drop in 2005 or an abnormal increase in 24. So you have to just start asking the questions. I want to understand why this is this kind of representative of a trend? And if so, what can we do to, where can we look to find some cost savings? Another way of doing this is to compare your district to others. And so these are four of the larger districts in the state. And here you can see a pretty significant difference, even in instruction spending per student. Instruction is the function that includes all the costs of direct interaction between teachers and students. So it's teacher pay and benefits, it's classroom aides, textbooks, and all those things. The student support would be things like speech pathologists and audiologists, whereas staff support is more in like professional training. Look at the difference in administration. Kansas City spends $2,000 per student in administration, or Lawrence gets it done for $1,300. Obviously, there's some opportunities for savings there. And the last part of lesson 4 is on fund accounting and understanding cash reserves. The chart you're looking at here shows that operating cash reserves have gone from about 470 million in 2005 to 1.3 billion at the end of the 24 school year, the start of this school year. So by operating, that's an accounting term which means there's no payments for debt held in here, none of the capital outlay, and we've also pulled out all the federal funds. Basically, what this means is that over that since 2005, there's been about $800 million of state and local taxes that were given to schools to educate students and instead was used to increase bank balances. Now, every district and every entity, every family needs some degree of cash reserves. The question is, are we putting our money to the best possible use? No one in 2005 was complaining that we don't have enough cash reserves. That's back when the schools were suing for more money in the Montoy case. And they weren't saying they didn't have enough cash reserves, but look at what's happened. And what this really indicates is schools are actually getting more money than they know what to do with in some cases. This is a few of the districts, and this varies greatly by district. Some districts have consistently had very low cash reserve levels, which means they're doing a good job of cash management. Others, you've seen some big increases. Wichita went from 76 million to 187 million, whereas Dodge City is at 33 million, but still that was a $29 million increase over time. So but basically these government accounting works like a personal checkbook. It's cash based. So imagine you put your paycheck into what you call your general fund checkbook. And then you transfer money from that to another checking account for home repairs or remodeling, and another one for vacations. Money moves back and forth. And that's a very simplified way of explaining how fund accounting works with school districts. Lesson 5 is all about communications. It's the one chapter that I did not write. Melanie Sturm wrote this, and I'd say if you only have time to read one chapter, read this one. Melanie is an expert, and she explains her 6 powers of persuasion. And again, Melanie's going to be doing a 2-hour seminar on this on April 24. You can go to KSBRC and register for that, and that will also register you for the entire series that we'll be offering, that 4-week series that starts on April 24. Her first power of persuasion is you are the message. Think of it as first impression. You only have a few seconds, probably less than 10 seconds, to make your initial impact on people. So you have to understand how to conduct yourself, how to smile, how to stand for it, how to be open and engaging. Finding common ground. There's often, in many cases, frankly, it's not right or wrong ways to do things. There's a lot of different perspectives on how things can be done, but we try to find common ground. And in the case of education, we ought to be able to agree that we all want to have better student outcomes. How we get there, we may have some disagreements or difference of opinions, but finding the common ground that we're all trying to hopefully get to the same place. The third power is fight for people, not things. So, if you're and things can include concepts like library books. You're not fighting against library books, you're fighting for the emphasis being on parental controlled academic improvement of students. It's how you frame things. using a fairness and compassion frame, basing it, your positions, your recommendations and so forth. You always want to try to build it into a fairness and compassion frame. Connect with storytelling. There's a phrase we use in the public policy world that says, facts tell and stories sell. I can give you chapter and verse on proficiency levels, and those are hard to remember, but you're probably going to really remember that story about the teacher who didn't know how to teach kids how to read. Connect with storytelling. And finally, pivoting to better ground. And this is really about how to handle semi-hostile situations and really diffusing them and trying to move. It's similar to finding common ground, but it's really about handling hostile situations. So this one is perfect, and I hope you can make the April 24 seminar. Lesson 6 is about being effective in the minority. And, you know, in most cases, people who go to are on school boards are in the minority because you're the student-focused person. The others might not think of themselves, but they're really there. And if you look at how they act, a lot of them are there defending the system rather than doing what's necessary for students. And if you've run that way, you probably have been positioned by the opposition as anti-education and all kinds of crazy things to scare people away. So you need to introduce yourself. Don't let anyone introduce you, but you. You define who you are. That's meeting with individuals. That's meeting with your superintendent, meeting with other school board members, and explain your approach. Another way of being effective is what my high school algebra teacher taught me, is drilled into me rather, is show me your work. So you have a school attorney saying, oh, no, we can't do that. Instead of arguing about it, you say, really? I didn't know that. I need to learn more about that. Can you show me the statutory reference where it says we can't do that? Because I want to learn more. And if the work isn't forthcoming quickly, then chances are you can do. And a lot of times we find that people will, including attorneys, will say you can, you must, or can't do something. And they're not right, but they don't know that they're not right, because a lot of times people will repeat what they've been told. And if you've been told something by someone you trust, it must be true. Show me your work. Explaining your vote is another great way of being effective. So here's an example that what actually took place. Board member has requested very specific information ahead of evaluating the budget. Early in the budget process, I'd like to see these things so I can understand how the money is flowing and to be able to make informed decisions. If the information doesn't come to you, when it comes time to vote, you have to say, this may be a good budget. I don't know, because I was not given the information I requested weeks ago. And so since I can't make an informed decision on this budget, I have no choice but to vote against it. And then the final one is the Army form of discipline. Now, the Army can't make a soldier do something, but it can make a soldier pretty damn sorry they didn't do what they were asked to do. So here's another example of how a board member used the Army form of discipline. Getting discussion items on for the board agenda is a real challenge. A lot of districts, again, have a policy that cede control to the board president. And so this board member had requested having a discussion item about student achievement several months in a row. Couldn't get it there. So finally, when she asked again and got turned down at the board meeting, she said, well, that's unfortunate because I think this is really important and the public needs to hear this conversation. So 2 weeks from tonight, I'm going to host a public meeting at the community center. We're going to get together at 7 o'clock and we're going to have this conversation. And she did it. And there was a really good turnout, and we were there. We were part of the program, and we had a really engaging conversation. And that really got conversations started in the district that led to some changes in how the district is still operating today. Finally, anticipate challenges to your lack of education credentials. I even get this when I'm talking in the legislature. Well, what do you know? You're not a teacher. Why should we listen to you? Well, actually, that's and the way that you would deal with that is, no, I'm not an educator, but it's not my responsibility as a board member to tell teachers what to do. The board's role is to set goals and then to have the district bring a plan, an operating plan to us to achieve those goals. And then we're going to vet the plan. If we agree on it, we're going to monitor the implementation. We're going to monitor the progress on student achievement. That's our role. It's not our role to say do this or do that. We have experts. They're called teachers who can tell us how to do that. Ask probing questions is the focus of lesson 7. And you can use your rookie status to your advantage. You're talking with whether it's a staff member or the superintendent or even a more experienced board member. You're not questioning. It's just I'm asking questions. Why do we do this? Where does that come from? I'm only asking. I'm not questioning why we do it. I just want to understand why we do it. It's not. Don't take this the wrong way. You set it up, you're explaining your focus. I'm looking for things. I want to learn more about this. Your rookie status can be very advantageous. Another way to ask probing questions is when what we call shiny objects come up. And these are two that are coming up more frequently is proposing that the district get into the daycare business. And in some cases, even we need to be doing something about affordable housing. And the premise for both of those is that they are recruiting tools, because if we can provide these things, teachers are going to be more likely to want to come here. And they provide it because they say teachers can't afford good housing. They can't afford to pay daycare. Well, those are symptoms. Why not strike at the root of the problem? And so we have in the book, we've done this for all 50 states. We did a 30-year look back. And in the case of Kansas, you could say, I looked back, and let's assume this applies the same to your district. Over the last 30 years, we've seen a 50% increase in inflation-adjusted spending per student. Those are really big increases. Unfortunately, teacher pay dropped more than 14%, adjusted for inflation. So the money was there. We just are spending it differently. Instead of trying to look at daycare or housing, why don't we repurpose money in our budget and really improve teacher pay? Now, you've not objected to the shiny objects. You're trying to refocus and bring everything back to student achievement. And there's an example in the book in lesson 7 of a district in Colorado Springs that did exactly this. They actually raised starting teacher pay by 20% by repurposing their budgets. The final lesson is on representing your community. I mentioned earlier that school board members are not elected to express their personal opinion or really kind of champion what the district wants. You're there to represent your community. That's the voters represented you. And so the way you do this is by getting a firm grasp on the community's visions and values. And this is a term that A.J. Crable uses. Visions are really the goals and very specific, like we want to go from this percentage of achievement to that percentage in this amount of time. The values are like guardrails, where the community might say, we want you to go from here to there, but along the way, be sure you do these things, or be sure you don't do those things. And that's where the board would take that back and say, all right, staff, you come back to us in this amount of time with your plan, and then we're going to talk about it. I'll give you another real world example here in Kansas. One school district invited us to come in and help them with strategic planning. And Tracy and I went to visit with them at a board meeting. And after we explained who we are and what we do, we said, now we understand that you are pretty proud of your achievement because you're 10 points above the state average. You're at 43% proficient and the state average is only 33. And yeah, right. Yes, we are. And we said, well, do you think your community would say mission accomplished at 43% proficient? They were stunned. They hadn't thought of it that way. But to their credit, they looked around and said pretty quickly, no, I guess not. We said, well, what do you think it would be? What do you think the community's goal would be? And they said, maybe somewhere between 70 and 80%. And so then we said, so guys, that means we have a lot of work to do, right? We put that in perspective, and they just you could just kind of see the weight coming down on them. And they said, yeah, we do. Turns out after running some listening sessions in the community, they were pretty right, pretty close to being accurate. That's where most of the community came in, somewhere around 75% proficient. So now everything you do is based on what your community wants. It's not what you want. So one example, we do a public opinion survey every year. And in one of the questions this year, we learned that 84% of parents or grandparents of kids in public school strongly or somewhat agree that parents should have the primary say in a child's education. So armed with this kind of information, that would indicate that your community wants anything that might be considered controversial to be opt-in, not opt-out. And it's not your opinion, it's what your voters are saying, this is what we expect you to do. So final thoughts before we get into Q&A. Make everything about improving student achievement. That's your purpose. That's your purpose. It's the district's purpose. It's the safe, productive way to talk about the changes, the dramatic changes that are going to have to take place. You always want to be the adult in the room. Credibility is your currency, and you never want to make it personal. It's not your thoughts. It's not criticizing someone else. It is all about improving student achievement. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can open the floor for questions. Nancy.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, we have to unmute Nancy.
Got it.
There we go.
So I'm a big fan of your work. I've been giving out these your books to prospective candidates as well as school board candidates, and I'm hoping to bring along more people in understanding how to maneuver with school boards. We're in a very blue state. One of the things that I've noticed, we're right in the middle of school board election season right now. And people who are filling out the various surveys, mine included, are really focusing a lot on mental health. And my question to you both is mental health, how do you look at that? Do you look at it as a student-focused versus system-focused type issue, or is it does it fall into some other category? Do you have thoughts on what's the right approach for that? Because I have some concern about how all in we're going in Delaware with this mental health support of kids.
Yeah, Nancy, that's a great question. And we actually touch on that a little bit in the book. Understanding we are not mental health experts, but one of the things, there's a book on Oh, it is, I forget the author's name right now, but we talk about him in the book,
Oh,
and he
Jonathan
noticed
Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt, that's it. Um, and Haidt has noticed that there are some things that schools can control that he believes has led to a dramatic increase. One of them is cell phones. He said that his research showed that around 2010, um, that was when the real kind of widespread availability of smartphones hit students. And since then, there has been this dramatic uptick in a variety of mental health issues. That's somewhere along in there as well. We started introducing some of these things that understandably would maybe confuse kids, like talking to kindergartens about gender identity. And so one of the things we encourage school board members to do, and we do the same thing with state legislators, by the way, is the first thing you want to do is look in the mirror and say, is there anything we're doing that maybe unintentionally is contributing to an increase in mental health? Is there anything that we could do differently? And those are two things. So I think, it would be good to know, if I was a school board member, I would ask the district, can you provide me a history? I'd like to go back at least 10 years and look at the history of mental health incidents as we've tracked them. I want to see first, how bad of a problem is it, and when did it change? And then you have a framework. So with yes, there are mental health issues, and schools have always had to deal with that. It's obviously become a bigger issue now. So we need to get a good handle first on anything we can find that might be contributing to it. And if it's things that we have any control over at the district, that's the first step, is stop doing things that might be contributing. And because we're not mental health experts, teachers are supposed to be reading and math experts. They weren't trained to be mental health experts. So we don't want to just leave it to them or say this is our responsibility, but it's basic problem solving. Okay, when did it start? When did it start growing? What else changed in those periods? And so what you're doing is you're agreeing that yes, we have an issue, and you're demonstrating a thoughtful approach to trying to get to the bottom of what the district can do.
We have another question. Nancy, did you get your question answered? And
I just want to say
make
that's
sure.
that's excellent advice, and I will definitely be talking to some of the new school board members about approaching that. So thank you.
Okay.
One of the questions we have, Dave, is how do we look at the paradigm shift of instruction, student learning as AI evolves? I know that AI is a big issue right now.
It is, and I'm by no means an AI expert. I know what the AI stands for, but that is not my bailiwick. But it's like anything else. I think you want to have this was good. This goes back to I forget what lesson it's in, but show me your work. If we're going to introduce something, whether in this case it's AI, it might be some new teaching method. It's let's have a really strong, robust discussion of what are we trying to accomplish with this? Show me the data on how this is going to improve student outcomes. And if it's not going to, if there's no data, if there's just it might, well, why are we doing it? Why would we do anything that is not part of accomplishing our mission? And it's just, look, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but this is our role as a board to ask these kinds of probing questions. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the downsides? Let's talk about the worst thing that can happen, so that it's kind of a risk management discussion as well. But there may be some things where AI can be very helpful, but like most technology, there's always going to be a downside. If one of the biggest weaknesses that we hear from college professors and from employers is that generally speaking, the kids coming out of school these days don't know how to write a paragraph. Well, you certainly don't want to make it even more challenging for them to write on their own, because you're not always going to have AI, just like you're not always going to have the calculator or the smartphone in your hand.
Yeah, there was a study that just came out of some controversies that came forward yesterday and this morning in regard to AI and its impact on critical thinking skills. There are some who will say that AI is good because we need to teach them how to use it. Others who are, taking away cell phones and taking away AI and say it impedes the development of critical thinking skills. So I think asking all those questions and determining, how it impacts those critical thinking skills as it relates to the student achievement scores and student achievement, certainly comes into play.
Right. And, who programmed? You want to know
Right.
who programmed who taught the computer how to think? What's their perspective? Do they have a perspective? If it's in education, hopefully they don't have any kind of political bent or ideology. They're not trying to teach kids what to think. They're trying to provide tools to help them learn how to think.
Agreed. Well, I have a question for you, just kind of an obvious question, asking addressing the elephant in the room. I know that you and I, as we talk to different school board members, we've had even conversations early this morning with school board members about proficiency scores, about, students' ability to read. There's oftentimes kind of a pushback on this, on the perspective, we really need to look at these outcomes, at the scores, at the proficiency scores, and at those cutoff, the grade level, the level 3 and level 4 for proficiency. And there are some who would say, it's just a test. It's not really reflective of how students do. It's not reflective of how well students can read. Can you speak to the criticism of using these scores?
Sure, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up, Tracy. It's interesting how we would never say something like, the Royals' batting average doesn't matter. They're all good hitters. If things matter, we're going to measure it. If it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. And it's true, yes, the test, it's just one test, okay? But it's one data point that agrees with all the other data points, frankly. The ACT shows low results, the NAEP shows low results, and most importantly, if you talk to college professors, community college professors, you talk to employers, they are really frustrated with kids coming out of high school thinking they know, thinking they're prepared, and finding out that they aren't. And that's a big contributor to some kids dropping out, not finishing, or taking 6 or 7 years to finish because they're so far behind. So, trying to excuse away the data does not help students. If our goal is to academically prepare kids for life after high school, then we need to have multiple data points indicating that we're approaching the level that the community expects us to be at. And so it's, testing matters. It's not perfect, but it's what we have. And certainly if we had a test that showed we're doing really well, and we had another test that showed we weren't, then we want to get to the bottom of what are the differences there. Maybe there's an explanation for that. But right now we're looking at, not just in Kansas again, but all across the country, we're seeing very consistent, persistently low achievement, especially for the low income kids. And so those things aren't going to change frankly, until the adults' behavior change.
Well, I would agree. As you know, my experience has been to build remediation programs for students who come into colleges that are ill prepared, and then they, accrue huge amounts of debt because they have to take those remedial courses, and or we've noticed that at one point the ACT was discounted for colleges and universities, and now that they realize that, wait a minute, that is a really good reflection of how students are going to be prepared. And ethically be able to go into an institution and have a successful experience going into college. So, of course, all of those measures help us to ensure that students are going to be able to be prepared for whatever it is that they choose in their career or in their college experience. So, any other last minute questions or thoughts from you, Dave? We have about 3 minutes before and we can go certainly, longer if we need to, but if anybody has any last minute questions.
No, I don't think I have anything else to add at this point. But I'll just close by saying thank you all for taking the time to do this. We wanted to have we like to do these things in person, but we know that a lot of people just the schedule never works for them. And so we wanted to do this one last option online so it can be recorded and available for people to view at their leisure. I just see that Nancy asked how will it be made available. Everybody who registered for this event will get an email with a link to the video when it's posted. It should be, I don't know, by Monday, certainly. But we'll let you know when it's available. And that's with the 4-week course we're starting April 24 will be handled the same way. It'll be recorded and they're in the library, and everyone, it'll be all in the same place. So if you know where this one is, you'll know where the next 4 are going to be. Because we're really excited about this, how the reaction we're getting from most people. There's a few out there who aren't real pleased with us because we're telling the truth about student achievement, and there are some folks in leadership roles that would rather not have that out there. I remember, and I think I told this story in the book, but a few years ago, I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting in Overland Park. I was on the Government Affairs Committee, and we were talking about legislative agendas, and I was pushing for some more accountability in state law. And I went through the data like we did earlier, and I said, based on this, we know that right here in Johnson County and all across Kansas, districts are giving diplomas knowing that some of the recipients can't read and do math at grade level. And it was a Chamber of Commerce meeting, so you can imagine and if you're familiar at all with Johnson County, there was quite an uproar. How dare you question what our schools are doing? One person got so upset, he slammed his notebook shut and stormed out of the room. But 2 people sat there and said nothing. And they were the superintendents of the Shawnee Mission and the Olathe school districts. They knew it was true. They just didn't want to talk about it. That's the ugly truth. There are a lot of people in the public education, and they're all working hard. I don't doubt that. But we're not going to get kids where they need to be by doing the same things over and over again at higher costs. And so the approach that we recommend everyone take is, look, we know everyone has been working hard. We have no doubt about that. This is not about pointing fingers. Unfortunately, despite all that hard work, we are where we are. And so we need to take the approach that no one is to blame, but everyone is responsible for moving forward and implementing whatever changes need to be made with urgency. So with that, I'll say thank you again to everyone. Look forward to the email letting you know. And anytime you have questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with Tracy or me or Ward Cassidy, email, phone calls, whatever, anytime. We're happy to help. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you.